So thanks all for coming out today. I'm Rob, manager for biological sciences, joined by Shubo. And today I thought what we could do is go through some medical image analysis tools and examples using MATLAB. So a brief outline for what we'll be talking about. First, we'll start with an opening poll. So please get your phones out, it's relevant. We'll talk about how MATLAB is used in the life sciences, including in the pharma space. Then talk about AI applications, labeling, microscopy, and then we'll hand it over to Shubo for sharing data, sharing code, scaling, and then ending with a Q&A. I know it's a long list, but we'll power through it. So first thing, usually what we like to do is open with a poll for the audience. That is, we have a couple of questions there about what kind of data you use, what kind of analysis you're working on, what kinds of databases you might use. And we would really appreciate if you could break out your phone, quickly answer this poll. I think it's 5 questions, because this really helps us to steer as a company what we are supporting. And since we're trying to help everybody out and make science a little bit faster, this helps us to gather more information. So a little bit about the company to begin with. Gartner a couple of years ago named us one of the Magic Quadrant for data science and machine learning platforms leaders, and you can kind of see us out there in the upper right as a leader next to IBM and Google and Microsoft in the data science and machine learning space. Along with being recognized as one of the leaders there, another important metric that the company uses is whether or not people like to work with us. So long story short, we were named one of the companies that is the most pleasant to work with among the customers that we do have. All right, so what is MATLAB? MATLAB is a programming environment. It's a programming language. It's a tool for end-to-end workflows. And I find that one of the things that is most underappreciated about MATLAB is people don't necessarily know everything that it can do. So when we're working on projects, the first thing that we do is take data. And MATLAB has tools to access files, file I/O. We have tools to scrape software. We have software to scrape from the web and to comb through databases. And we have tools that can both acquire streaming data right from instruments and control the instruments themselves. Obviously, we have tools for exploring and analyzing. That is one of the things that MATLAB is most well known for. There are a few things here that are pretty well known: image processing, statistics, and machine learning. But we also have tools for text analysis, biological sequence analysis, and of course, Simulink for a lot of modeling and simulation. The last step for most people is to share their code, share their results. And so we have tools that can automatically generate code for application and embedded systems. So that includes compiling to make executable and deployable apps, as well as generating C code directly from MATLAB code to be used in other things. We have tools to scale up to the cloud. And one of the things that has always had me the most excited is that MATLAB can be used to automate report generation. That includes PDFs, docs, PowerPoints, and that sort of thing. So if you find yourself doing the same analysis over and over again, then pouring it into a PowerPoint or through any of these channels here, that task can kind of be automated so that the next time you do it, it goes a lot faster. So right out of the box, MATLAB natively supports read, write, analyze, and AI applications for tabular, signal, text, and then among the images, which I know is the most important for this crowd, clinical, preclinical, and microscopy, and we'll talk about that a little bit. MATLAB also supports database and cloud, and we also interface, we also have tie-ins with other cloud management softwares like Databricks and Domino, although this is certainly not an exhaustive list. Okay, so that's enough like market speak. Why is that actually important? The reason why it's important is that if MATLAB can handle all of these different data types, then for one thing, you only have to use one platform. You only have to use one space to do all this stuff. It's also possible to start combining these things in meaningful ways. So let me elucidate on that a little bit. When people think of AI, a lot of the time what they think of is taking image data, running it through a network, and then getting something like an automatic segmentation or scene classification or something along those lines. But since MATLAB supports all these different data types, you can read in all of this different kinds of data, run it through a network, and get all kinds of different outputs that are supported by all of these different data types to which we have access. And we find that people are using AI for example, in drug discovery and development. MATLAB is well adopted at a lot of schools, but there are a lot of people in the commercial and government research environments that are using these tools. For example, looking at the drug discovery and development pipeline, there are a lot of ways to slice this pipeline. This is one example. The American CDC uses MATLAB for disease tracking. We have examples about predicting protein structure using AI, automating flow cytometry toxicity using deep learning, looking at deep learning to assess morphological changes in cellular toxicity. Here's an example I'll come back to, but 3D tumor auto-segmentation using deep learning. Pfizer has used MATLAB to reduce phase 2 attrition. A fairly recent story is that we worked with Cipla to accelerate their manufacturing with app-based machine learning. And I'd be glad to talk about what that project looks like. GSK also used MATLAB to improve their manufacturing process with AI. And when we're looking at monitoring how well things are going in the world after drug discovery and development, we have a great example where it's possible to predict hospital readmission using AI with electronic health records. So we are seeing a lot of use of this software for solving research and commercial problems. And MATLAB itself is pretty versatile for use and for sharing. The most common way that people tend to develop code is through this integrated design environment, where the plots, the code, the command line, those are all in the same window. But we also, for people who may not want to code so much, we also have a lot of GUI and app-based workflows. So we have a lot of tools where you don't have to code in order to segment some images. And in fact, most of our apps, when you're done using them, you can press a button and it will give you code that does all of what you just did by button pushes. If you're a little bit old school, if you want to keep it to the classics, of course, there's the command line interface, and of course, cloud. And for sharing, MATLAB has projects, which is a collaborative environment that multiple people can work on similar project or can work on the same project. We naturally support Git interfacing and source control, and even continuous integration now. And we have app development. So you can take MATLAB, make a GUI, or make some sort of app using our app development kit, and then deploy it to an executable or even through a web interface so that other people can use whatever you're developing. So I want to talk for a second about the AI tools specifically. So MATLAB does support the full AI-driven system design workflow. So classic AI workflow: prepare the data, model that data, simulate and test, and then finally deploy. So not to reiterate that we have all of these things, but what I wanted to mention specifically is that out of the box, MATLAB ships with a lot of these algorithms and pre-built models. For example, you can open it up and immediately start using SVM, k-means, condition indicators, and so on. We also have a lot of pre-built models. So right in MATLAB, you can install and start using AlexNet, BGG, Inception, and so on among these pre-built models. And it's also pretty easy, pretty straightforward to start doing something like transfer learning. And we have lots of examples where people have done object detection, signal and speech processing, but also transfer learning for image analysis. For example, I point to a few examples here: pose estimation using deep learning, 3D brain tumor segmentation, and segmenting lungs from CT scans using a pre-trained neural network. And these are all on the website if you want to check them out. One really cool feature is that MATLAB also interoperates with other frameworks. So you can call MATLAB from Python, you can call Python from MATLAB, but you can also take deep neural networks and other kinds of networks that were trained elsewhere and import them into MATLAB. So you can import TensorFlow, PyTorch, Keras, and Caffe right into MATLAB, but MATLAB also interfaces with the ONNX network. So you can bring in other people's networks, you can train networks in MATLAB and then give them to other people. So MATLAB is part of this ecosystem of AI development and sharing. So one of the main things I want to hit on today is that we have this new medical imaging toolbox. And this was developed after speaking with a lot of people who are using MATLAB for medical image analysis to address some of the things that they were concerned about. So we have this new tool that's specifically for medical imaging data I/O, visualization, labeling, pre-processing, data augmentation, medical image registration, and general segmentation. And what I can do is talk about a couple of these things. For these new tools, they're meant to support radiological images: MR, CT, X-ray, ultrasound, and nuclear. And what the general changes are for this toolbox is that our new tools are specific for medical imaging workflows. So what we're looking at here is our old volume viewer, which is a great tool for viewing generalized volumes. But when we're using these old tools, for example, to look at medical images, they aren't oriented in a way that is commonly used for medical images. It's tougher to set the opacity transfer function. It can be difficult to use segmentation masks for labeling here. So what we did was, rather than have this general purpose app, we wanted to make something that was specific for medical imaging. And so now what we have is an integrated medical specific workflow that is meant for medical image analysis. So you might be able to tell from here that the anatomical orientation and labels are there, that the 3D imaging kernel has been updated and it looks a lot better. And what I'll go into is a little bit more about labeling, registration, and pre-processing specifically. But one of the big take-home messages is that our visualization kernel itself has been updated and now is also GPU accelerated. So one of our keystone features is that we have a new medical image data type. And this is really something that I want to hammer home for some of the more advanced programmer users here. So rather than only load a medical image as an image matrix and load the meta information and spatial information as something like a struct, all of that can now be loaded, including spatial reference information, into one object, which can be processed. And that one object doesn't have to only support regular Cartesian grid images. It can support oblique planes and even like multi-slice planes. So this is super cool. This is really cutting edge. So along with that keystone feature, our other keystone feature is this medical image labeler app. And what we've built is a tool that's meant to support especially AI workflows, but general segmentation and analysis. What we're looking at here is X-ray CT lungs. So we have, when it comes to the pre-built rendering, we have, it's much easier now than it used to be to change the opacity transfer functions and color maps. And we even have some pre-built stuff that you might be able to see on this rendering presets. So linear grayscale, sure, but X-ray CT to show soft tissue or bone, or CT to show the lung, or even maximum intensity projections. These things are all available as canned settings that can be used for this image. And I don't have an animation here, but as you're updating the labels, whether it's by hand or using some deep neural network, those labels update in the 3D viewing window as well. So it can be made to be very quick feedback for the labeling and visualization. We do have some really great semi-automated labeling tools. On the left, we're looking at level tracing. So that is a user clicks on a particular voxel, and then there is a 2D flood fill that fills nearby voxels of similar intensity. And there's a threshold to dial this up or down. And you can imagine that pretty quickly, it's possible to label a whole lung. Maybe not perfectly, and that's why we have tools that are meant for cleaning up by hand. Right here, we're looking at a 2D image. This is projection X-ray, and somebody labeling, I think, an ulna. This is a task that used to take a long time, and now using this superpixel segmentation, where again, a user can define how large the superpixels they want are using a drag bar. In just a few seconds, that's a whole bone image. So if you're trying to do something like projection analysis, intensity analysis, or even build a library for deep learning, now this can all be done pretty quickly. We also have some really cool new image registration tools based on iterative closest point, moment, and then we have deformable registration, non-rigid, and also group-wise. These are new and specifically designed for 3D volumes, although all of our other 2D image registration tasks still work. And these go along with the 5 existing registration functions that are in the image processing toolbox: translation, rigid, similarity, affine, and deformable. So along with all this labeling and rendering, we also have pre-processing tools. That is, for example, ultrasound denoising and image resampling, but all of the other pre-processing techniques that already are in MATLAB, median filtering, range filtering, that sort of thing, they're all still available too. So now we have this workflow that includes a broad product set. So we kind of touched on IO, visualization, all the way through labeling, but those are focused on for the medical imaging toolbox and the image processing toolbox. But we also have the deep learning toolbox, the computer vision toolbox, and the parallel toolbox. And these new medical imaging tools fit in very well with our existing tools. All of the MATLAB tools kind of work together. And we're seeing that people are already doing cool stuff. For example, surface extraction. It's possible to take a bone image or take some sort of medical image, segment it, then get a surface in STL format for 3D printing or finite element analysis. You can imagine that this is pretty useful for building prosthetics or for some sort of personalized structural medicine. We've also seen people use our deep learning tools for, in this case, for multimodal MRI auto segmentation of a brain tumor. And we have a lot of examples on the website. Okay, so briefly, I wanted to touch also on our microscopy tools. So historically, microscopy image analysis starts with an image. You do the pre-processing, segmentation, maybe some more morphological processing, and then quantification and higher order statistics. And now what we're seeing with the addition of AI is a lot of labeling then running some AI. And then that AI is now becoming kind of a central point for a lot of other activities, classification, CAD, but it all winds up with quantification and high order analysis and statistics. There has to be a reported number. And so what we've done is tried to design new tools that are specifically for microscopy that can also be used with our AI tools. Blocked image is a new data type for ND images of any size that, so mostly what I'll be talking about is like gigapixel whole slide images. So here's an original image and a segmentation. This is kind of a quick and dirty segmentation of tissue versus non-tissue. But this data type also supports something like calculating cell density and then reporting that on a map. And of course, our AI tools can be used with this new data type. And mostly what I'll be talking about is blocked image for microscopy images of any size. Mostly what I'll be talking about is applications for 2D. But since this data type supports any size, any dimension, you can imagine it can be used for something like 7 Tesla MRI brain imaging or for light sheet microscopy. We do have some new tools using our border size to prevent double counting and apply. So if you have a bunch of cells that are on the edge of patches, assigning a border size that is just larger than the characteristic size of the cell avoids double counting. So this cell in the upper left belongs to the upper left patch. Similar for this one, this cell in the lower left doesn't get assigned to the upper left. It only gets assigned to where its centroid is. So in this way, we are solving a problem that can be kind of a headache to program. We do have a lot of large image visualization. We have a 3D one, which I'll come back to in a second, and 2D. So it's possible to zoom and pan, visualize generally. We also have labeling tools. So along with this visualization step, you can also label these gigapixel images using MATLAB. By the way, for the advanced pathologists out there, I know that's not a tumor. I didn't make this slide. I'm working with the team to label this properly as adipose tissue. One cool feature is that you can warp these images too. We also have tools that are meant for 3D. So 3D RGB volumes can be labeled and visualized. It's possible to go through and visualize one block at a time in these large 3D images to label them and then to do some kind of analysis on them. There's also a community of development out there. So on the file exchange, this is where people host their open source tools. People develop in MATLAB, they put it on file exchange with an open source license. There are also a lot of people who develop and put code onto the GitHub, which can be linked to the file exchange. So you can put something on the GitHub, link it to the file exchange, only have to update the code in one location, and also increase visibility by cross-listing on the file exchange. And here's a list of microscopy tools that are well adopted in the field. There is also a ton of development for general medical image analysis. So when it comes to microscopy, here's a quick example where University Hospital Heidelberg used our AI tools to predict survival from colorectal cancer H&E images. So we have all these great tools for life sciences. We also have a pharmacology tool called Symbiology and Bioinformatics tools, which I didn't mention today. But the point is, since MATLAB supports all of these things can start, these different packages can start to be combined for higher level orders of analysis. We also have a lot of web pages that support, are relevant to the life sciences. And of course, we have a lot of training. There's a lot of training that's available for free, online, self-paced. If you want to learn some MATLAB, this is a really great place to start. And Shubo and I would be glad to discuss any of these points. And on that, I'd like to hand it over to Shubo to talk a little bit more about sharing code, data and tools, and open biology generally.
Thanks, Rob. I'll just share my screen here. Not so familiar with Zoom, but I think I can manage. Okay, thank you. So thank you, Rob. And Rob gave you a overview of some of the tools for biological image processing and medical image processing. I'm not a biologist by training, as Claudia pointed out, but in my job at MathWorks is to liaise with the different cloud research platforms and science gateways where the scientists and researchers use to share data, code, tools. And so I'll give you a overview of what we have in terms of sharing data, code, and tools and using MATLAB for open biology. I'm going to start off with something very similar to sort of Rob's picture of getting the data, analyzing the data, and sharing the data. I think life as a researcher, and that can be any sort of research you do, not just a biologist, not just a biologist, consists of three main sort of activities that we do, which is collecting data or reusing data or getting hands on data, analyzing that data, and then finally sharing those results. And in each of these different parts of a research workflow, I'm going to point out some of the things that you can do with MATLAB to optimize sort of your research workflow and also make it more open. So in terms of collecting data, I'll show you some examples of what you can do in terms of accessing public data, public databases with MATLAB and using APIs. In terms of analyzing data, I'll give you a short overview of our live scripts, which are sort of MATLAB notebooks. We do also integrate with Jupyter notebooks. So if anyone has questions there, I'm happy to take those at the end. Talk about using open science infrastructure that includes HPC and research clouds and science gateways, and also a little bit about interoperability with other languages, mainly Python. And then I will wrap up with a little bit on publishing MATLAB code, reusable MATLAB code, a lot of overlap with some of the things that Rob's mentioned. Now, because I work with science gateways and because my main job is to make sure that MATLAB users can share their code with other users and build hybrid workflows, I also am one of the main people at MathWorks who works to see that MATLAB workflows can integrate with open science, and that MATLAB users can share their output with other users and work in collaborative atmospheres. As a postdoc and a researcher, I definitely depend a lot on collaboration and a lot on other people. So I also personally value a lot the potential for collaboration. So I guess a lot of you are familiar with the FAIR acronym that stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It also applies, of course, to research software like MATLAB. And that's why when I talk about collecting data, I've tried to sort of match those up to the parts of FAIR. So collecting data is all about accessibility of data from your software. In terms of analyzing data, it's about making your code accessible, human readable to others. It's about interoperability with other languages, interoperability with platforms. And when it comes to sharing results, it's about making your MATLAB code findable and reusable. So we're going to start off with collecting data. We were hearing in the session just before ours about public databases. And of course, there's a lot of public data today on data portals, and it's become very normal to use those in one's research and one's workflows. There's a lot of reasons people do that. People might reuse data instead of generating new data because that might be time consuming and expensive. And we know that getting hands on really good data is tough. It's also used, public data can also be used for benchmarking your algorithms against a standardized data set that's out there. And the sort of standard way to use this data, apart from downloading data, which you can always do, but as data gets big, downloads might not always be the most convenient form, are to use APIs. So before this talk, I just went in and I Googled biological images database, and I got the IDR database, the image data resource, and I think Euro-BioImaging, at least I saw your logo on that database, so you are affiliated with it. And it's a lovely example of what an API looks like, right? So you go to the API access page, and you have some URLs that point to where the data is, and you have some parameters like the image ID, which you then query, and you get a lot of metadata. And this is the bit that really helps in making data fair. It's a rich description in the metadata, who collected the data, what kind of data it is, parameters, etc. And then, of course, people can get their hands on the actual data. So as an example, as a exercise, what I did is I went into MATLAB and replicated that Jupyter notebook that you saw on IDR, just to show you like you can do very similar things in MATLAB. And this is a MATLAB live script, which I'll talk about later. But what you see on the top little bit are the URLs that I've specified, and then I have taken the same image ID, and then I've queried that image ID, and I have the metadata on the right in a structure format. And then I can also access the image. And the basis of this is this function called WebRead, which is the MATLAB function that uses the RESTful API of websites to pull data. REST APIs are one of the most common forms of APIs. So if you have some data that exposes itself through a REST API, you can use the WebRead function. The other very common way is a Python API, and I'll show you in a few slides how you can call Python functions from MATLAB to also enable you to do that sort of thing from your MATLAB workflow. And next, I'll jump into analyzing data. So I'll talk about live scripts and functions first. Live scripts are sort of our take on computational notebooks, MATLAB computational notebooks. As I said, we also have a MATLAB interface for Jupyter Hub, and we are in the process of developing a MATLAB kernel for Jupyter, which so this is still not out there, but should be in about a few months, should be out. But coming back to the live script is a way of combining MATLAB code with output and with things like text, pictures, graphics, equations in one document, so that it helps people to learn and grasp what you've done in your analysis pipeline. And over here on the left, I have a sort of classic MATLAB script, and on the right, I have a MATLAB live script. One of the nice features I like about MATLAB live scripts is you can embed these user controls. So if you have some parameters in your analysis, you can have like user controls, and the user can then play with these controls and change these parameters. So there you see with the mouse over, and that would automatically update the analysis based on these parameters. And I think it's a very easy click and point way of getting those different bits and pieces in a notebook. I use this most of the time to communicate my findings at lab meetings, because let's face it, how often do you hear things like, have you tried this with another parameter, and what exactly did you do? So at the top level of the wrapper function, I often use these live scripts myself. One of the nice things about live scripts is we have these things called live editor tasks, which are basically snippets of code that are often used, standardized, that using just click and point, you can embed in your live script. So I'm showing you an example of a create plot live task. It's got all the different kinds of plots that are available in MATLAB. If you click on it, you see them. And what you can do is you can just link variables in your workspace with the right kind of plot, and then you can have the plot. So it's a visualization that's very fast with a click and point GUI. But then you can also ask the program to generate the code behind that click and point GUI, so you can start off developing your own code. And we do add live tasks with every release. The newest one is the dimensionality reduction, PCA. So you can see in that screenshot, you have some drop-down menus, and you can link variables in your workspace to those in those drop-down menus for input data and things like grouping variables, and then you can have your PCA analysis. So it's quite handy when quickly putting together something like this. The next bit I'm going to talk about is accessing all of this different infrastructure that come out. So it follows naturally from big data. If you've got big data and you're analyzing big data, you probably need big compute. And at some point, you run out of computing power on your own machine. So that's when things like using remote clusters or parallel programming come in. Now, one of the things about parallel programming and using HPC, so I've got a friend of mine who worked many years in HPC, and he always jokes and says, HPC stands for high performance computing, but it also stands for hard to program computing. And it's in a way, there is a relatively high barrier to entry for your average scientist to go in and start using the HPC cluster. And one of the things that I think MATLAB does well is abstract away that complexity. So not having to learn CUDA to use a GPU, not having to deal with Slurm, with schedulers, but just being able to go from your desktop to a cluster in a few clicks and scale up and use that infrastructure. So we have this thing called Parallel Computing Toolbox, which basically takes your code and makes it run on as many cores or workers, we call them, which are like computational MATLAB computational threads as are available to you. You can do that with relatively few changes in code. So as you can see on the top right, you can change the for loop from for to par for. And what that does is take your loop and break it up into components that can be executed in parallel and send those to the different cores on your machine. Now, of course, if your machine has too few cores for you, you can also use a local or remote HPC cluster. And we have this other product called MATLAB Parallel Server, which is on the HPC side. And what that does is handshakes with your local desktop MATLAB. So you just send off your job as if you're sending it to more cores on your desktop, but that job will be then sent and distributed on the cluster side to the cluster you're using, and MATLAB will take care of things like interfacing with the right kind of scheduler, etc. And also for GPUs with the CUDA libraries that would enable you to take advantage of that GPU. Just stepping back for one moment, I use things like Parallel Computing Toolbox, MATLAB Parallel Server. Rob's talked about Medical Imaging Toolbox. All of that is included in these campus-wide licenses, which a majority of schools and universities in Europe have. And so we're not talking about any extra products, but everything is based on that based on that campus-wide license. And campus-wide license also have an unlimited amount of workers you can use when you scale up to the cluster. So if you have 1,000 cores on the cluster compute nodes that are available to you, then you can use all of those compute nodes. In terms of infrastructure, not just HPC, but it's also open infrastructure and things like Jupyter Hubs, research clouds, science gateways. And you can take your license with you and use your license on these sort of science gateways. This is an example of the EGI notebooks, which is linked to some data spaces on EOSC. And we've integrated then. You can see you go in, if you have a Jupyter Hub, you click on MATLAB, you have a sign-in window, you sign in using your MathWorks ID, and automatically your license goes there, and you're able to use that on that research cloud. So those are two aspects of licensing that we've worked on a lot to make things more open and make things more shareable. One is the ability to use your license anywhere you want to, clouds, clusters, VMs. This is something for which, if you have a favorite cloud or cluster or VM where you want to use your license, you need to talk to us, and we will help you. And we would work with the Science Gateway to integrate MATLAB and set this process up for you. At the moment, we are in discussions with Euro-BioImaging to try and see if we can integrate MATLAB on their band system. So do get in touch with us if you have a favorite place where you would need MATLAB. The other part of flexible licensing is about sharing your license. We call this third-party access. There's more on that link at the bottom. And what that means is if you have a MATLAB license, you can share that license with anybody in the world on the condition that that's an academic project and that the access to MATLAB takes place on hardware that you own. So for example, if the University of Heidelberg has 3 researchers in 3 other corners of the world that they want to give access to their system, then those people can use the University of Heidelberg's license, and you don't have to talk to us because of that. For that, this is something that is included in your software agreement with MathWorks. And we see the combination of those two sort of opening up in terms of enabling sharing. In terms of interoperability, Rob touched on this. Python and MATLAB, you might want to use the functionality of one language and another, or use code without having to rewrite it. So from the Python to the MATLAB side, you can use this command called py, and then you run Python commands or run entire Python files from MATLAB. And on the other side, we have this thing called MATLAB Engine, which you can pip install on the Python side, and then you can import MATLAB Engine like you would import a Python library, and then you can start a MATLAB session from Python or connect to an ongoing MATLAB session and gain access to your variables in the workspace. Wrapping up with ideas to share your code or make your code more reusable, MATLAB code more reusable. The first place, certainly, I just wanted to reiterate what Rob was talking about is FileExchange. FileExchange, because it has a lot of visibility for other MATLAB users, and there's a one button, one click way of installing FileExchange toolboxes from your desktop MATLAB. It has about 40,000 community contributions. These are all open source toolboxes just to make sure that we're on the same page. Open source, of course, refers to the license that covers your toolbox. And if your toolbox is covered by a permissive license and allows other people to share and build on it, then that's an open source toolbox. And we insist that community contributions on FileExchange should be covered by a open source license. That's what FileExchange looks like. It's searchable. And as Rob said, it's linkable with GitHub repos. So you can have your GitHub repo and you can just link it here. And every time you have a new release on GitHub, FileExchange will synchronize automatically. We also, so FileExchange is not everything. We also are aware that there's a lot of reproducibility sites. And it's also important for toolbox authors to have DOIs sometimes for their code, and DOIs make code fair because it gives it a persistent identifier. So we partner with reproducibility sites like CodeOcean, for example. CodeOcean is a site where after you've published your papers, this is a paper, and in the data availability statement, you can see that they say that the code is available on CodeOcean, and you can upload the whole code with your paper onto CodeOcean. You get a DOI generated, so people can cite you. And what happens is so CodeOcean is compatible with all kinds of software, R, Julia, Python, and also MATLAB. This is a bit of MATLAB code in CodeOcean. You can go in, you can look at the code, you can read it, and you can also click on reproducible run and actually run the MATLAB code in the browser and spit out the figures and the results. So it's really where you can verify the results that you have, and it comes in quite handy. For example, if a reviewer wants to run your code. Just wanted to share this very recent paper because it's very relevant to this. It's about fair research software, and it's quite interested to see how they talked about the different fair aspects and how that relates to research software. And if you go to the list, you will see that MATLAB is compatible with all of these, and certainly this gives us new ideas about where we can help make MATLAB workflows more fair. So if you have questions, if you have ideas, please reach out to us. And there's a couple of resources. I think Rob's already shared with you, but I have a page on open science with MATLAB with some stories and some examples. So that's for me. That's all from me. If you want to need MATLAB on your data portal, on your infrastructure, on your HPC, or just working with an interesting MATLAB project, reach out to us. Let us know. We'll be happy to hear from you, help you, maybe have a cooperation. So thank you. And sorry, so that's the people from MATLAB, Rob and me, and some of the others in Europe and America that support biologists.